Ethan's Rolls-Royce rolled smoothly through the pristine gates of Cedar Grove Estates, its polished silver body reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror. At just 23, he looked every inch the young entrepreneur, confident, stylish, and undeniably wealthy. But in a neighborhood where everyone valued appearances and tradition, Ethan's flashy entrance stirred more than admiration. It stirred suspicion. As the gate clicked shut behind him, Ethan caught his first wary glance from Karen Whitman, the HOA's self-appointed guardian of the community's moral compass. Karen, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, watched Ethan like a hawk from her porch, lips pursed as if she smelled something rotten. To her, this young man with the Rolls-Royce didn't belong here. Not yet. The residents of Cedar Grove had long held a quiet understanding. Success was earned slowly and quietly. Flashy displays of wealth, especially from someone so young, were a breach of their unspoken code. Ethan knew this unwritten rule well, but he wasn't about to hide who he was. He pulled into the driveway of his new home, a modern mansion that gleamed just as much as his car. The landscaping was impeccable, the kind of place that made neighbors stop and whisper, but Ethan didn't care. He'd worked hard to get here, and no amount of suspicion would change that. As he stepped out of the car, a folded piece of paper fluttered down from the windshield wiper. Ethan picked it up and unfolded it carefully. Written in neat block letters were just 4 words. "We don't welcome scams." His heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from the realization that trouble had found him already. Who had left the note, and why did it feel so personal? Later that evening, at the community's welcome party held in the lavish clubhouse, Ethan felt the weight of every gaze on him. The air buzzed with polite smiles and forced introductions, but Karen's eyes pierced through the facade. When she approached, her voice was icy. "So, Ethan," she said, voice loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear, "where exactly does a 23-year-old get the money to drive a Rolls-Royce and live in a place like this?" The question wasn't just about curiosity, it was a challenge. Ethan smiled calmly, his tone even but firm. "I built a tech startup from the ground up," he said. "I'm not here to impress anyone, just to live." Karen's lips curled into a thin smile. "Interesting. We'll see if the HOA agrees." Word of the confrontation spread quickly. By the next morning, Ethan's mailbox contained not just the usual welcome pamphlets, but also unsigned letters warning him about the dangers of easy money and people who don't belong. His neighbors, who had nodded politely the night before, now crossed the street when they saw him coming. But Ethan wasn't deterred. The stakes were clear. If he wanted to belong here, he'd have to prove that his success was legitimate and that Karen's suspicions were baseless. Yet beneath his confident exterior, a small voice whispered caution. Cedar Grove wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a battlefield where reputation meant everything, and one misstep could mean social exile. That night, as Ethan locked the door and glanced out the window, he caught movement across the street. A figure stood just beyond the street lamp's glow, watching him. The street was empty, but the eyes felt relentless. Ethan shivered slightly, realizing this was no ordinary welcome. The game had begun. The next HOA meeting was unlike any Ethan had ever attended. The room was packed with residents whose faces wore a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and, in some cases, barely concealed hostility. Karen Whitman took center stage immediately, wielding her influence like a weapon, her eyes locked on Ethan, as if daring him to speak. "I believe," Karen began, her voice sharp and commanding, "that this community deserves transparency. We need to know where Ethan's money comes from. A Rolls-Royce at 23? It just doesn't add up. I'm calling for a full investigation into his financial background." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to side with Karen or with the newcomer. Ethan's heart pounded. But his face remained calm, his hands folded neatly on the table in front of him. "I'm happy to provide whatever proof is needed," Ethan said steadily. "My income comes from a legitimate tech startup. I'm proud of what I've built." But Karen wasn't finished. "It's not just about legitimacy. It's about trust. How can we trust someone who flaunts wealth so openly? It sets a dangerous precedent. Who else might be hiding behind a facade here?" Her words stoked the flames of suspicion. Ethan could feel the room shifting. Eyes once neutral now scrutinized him with thinly veiled distrust. After the meeting, Ethan stepped outside to catch his breath. That's when he noticed the cameras, small, discreet devices mounted on lampposts and even on the side of a neighbor's house, pointed directly at his property. He frowned. "Who's watching me?" Over the next few days, the surveillance felt suffocating. Deliveries were delayed without explanation. A contractor hired to fix a broken gate refused to work on Ethan's home, claiming orders from above. Even neighbors who had greeted him warmly now crossed the street or avoided eye contact. Ethan began to dig into Karen's past, hoping to understand the woman who seemed obsessed with ruining him. What he found unsettled him. Karen had a history of disputes in other communities, legal complaints for harassment, accusations of intimidation, tactics against newcomers. One evening, as Ethan reviewed HOA documents on his laptop, his phone buzzed with an anonymous message. "Stop digging, or else." His pulse quickened. The message was clear and chilling. Determined not to be cowed, Ethan called Mrs. Jenkins, a quiet widow who lived next door. To his surprise, she confessed her own unease about Karen. "Karen's power is dangerous," Mrs. Jenkins said quietly. "She's ruled this neighborhood with fear for years, but no one talks about it because she's good at pretending." With new resolve, Ethan knew he couldn't fight Karen alone. The HOA board was hesitant, caught between Karen's influence and growing concerns about fairness. Late one night, Ethan returned home to find his Rolls-Royce vandalized, scratches along the paint, a broken side mirror. A threatening note pinned to the windshield read, "Leave now or worse will come." The neighborhood's polished facade had cracked, revealing a darker undercurrent. Ethan realized this was no longer just about proving his legitimacy. It was about survival. Standing by his damaged car, Ethan made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth about Karen and whoever was orchestrating this campaign of fear. The community that once seemed like a prize now felt like a trap, and escaping. It would be far from easy. The game wasn't just on, it had escalated. By the following morning, Ethan's vandalized Rolls-Royce had become the latest hot topic in Cedar Grove Estates. Whispers filled the air like a toxic fog. Some expressed sympathy, but many seemed to side with Karen's suspicions, convinced that someone with that kind of money must have skeletons in the closet. At the weekly coffee meetup in the community garden, Ethan tried to shake off the heavy atmosphere, but even old Mrs. Jenkins avoided sitting nearby. A few neighbors glanced furtively at him before looking away, as if afraid to be caught associating with the outsider. But Ethan wasn't about to retreat. He had one goal: to expose the truth behind Karen's crusade and reclaim his place in the neighborhood. His first step was simple: dig deeper into Karen's background. Hours of online research revealed a series of troubling facts. Karen Whitman was no mere concerned homeowner. She was a veteran of HOA battles across the state, multiple lawsuits, allegations of harassment, and even a restraining order from a previous community suggested a pattern. Karen wielded power like a weapon, crushing anyone who dared challenge her. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. If Karen was the real threat, exposing her could turn the tide. But Karen wasn't idle. On the same day Ethan uncovered her history, he noticed new signs of surveillance, tiny cameras hidden in flower pots and peeking from mailbox corners. Someone was watching his every move. Then, strange deliveries began arriving at his doorstep. Anonymous packages containing cryptic items, a broken watch, a torn photo of his car, even a crudely drawn map of his property marked with an X. The messages were clear. Ethan was being toyed with. Late one night, as Ethan reviewed security footage from his home cameras, a shadowy figure appeared outside. The footage was grainy, but the person moved with purpose, planting something near the garage. Ethan's heart raced. Was this sabotage or an attempt to frame him? The next morning, Ethan confronted Karen during a casual run-in at the neighborhood pool. Her expression was icy, but she feigned innocence. "I'm just looking out for the community's best interests," Karen said smoothly. "Maybe if you weren't so secretive, people wouldn't be suspicious." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You've been spying on me, planting evidence." "Why?" Karen smiled thinly. "Sometimes you have to protect the neighborhood from people who don't belong. It's nothing personal." Her words hit like a slap. This wasn't a mere clash of neighbors. It was a battle for control. Despite the escalating tension, Ethan found unexpected support in a few neighbors quietly approaching him. Mr. Alvarez, a retired detective living a few houses down, offered to review the surveillance footage and investigate the vandalism. Mrs. Jenkins confided stories of Karen's previous reign of terror, how she'd bullied families, manipulated HOA votes, and twisted rules to her advantage. With allies at last, Ethan's confidence grew. Together, they began piecing together the extent of Karen's campaign, not just against him, but anyone who threatened her grip on the community. But just as Ethan thought he was gaining ground, a chilling message arrived. "Stop asking questions, or you'll regret it." This time, it was scrawled on a crumpled envelope left on his doorstep. The stakes were clear. Whoever was behind the threats was watching and willing to escalate. Ethan locked the envelope away but felt a cold knot in his stomach. Cedar Grove was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a labyrinth of secrets and lies, and Ethan was trapped inside. As night fell, Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, a voice message played, a distorted, threatening whisper. "Leave before it's too late." Ethan stared at the phone, realizing this was more than paranoia. He was in a war, and Karen was just the tip of the iceberg. The morning sun spilled over Cedar Grove estates, casting long shadows across manicured lawns and elegant facades. But for Ethan, the day felt darker than ever. The previous nights, threats hung heavy in his mind as he approached his driveway. The once pristine Rolls-Royce now wore the scars of vandalism, but what unnerved him more was the invisible presence, the feeling that someone was always watching. He wasn't wrong. Hidden, cameras dotted the landscape, and the faintest rustle of movement near his property reminded him he was never truly alone. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, a text message appeared on the screen. "Stop asking questions or you'll regret it." The words were chilling in their simplicity. Yet Ethan refused to back down. Instead, he called his friend and mentor, Mr. Alvarez, the retired detective. Over coffee in a small, dimly lit cafe, Ethan laid out the pieces: the harassment, the vandalism, the anonymous threats. Alvarez listened carefully, his sharp eyes flickering with concern. "This isn't just neighborhood drama," Alvarez said. "Someone's trying to intimidate you, maybe even drive you out. We need to be methodical, document everything, install your own surveillance, and get the board involved if you can." Ethan nodded, already 2 steps ahead. He installed extra cameras, hired a security consultant, and kept a detailed log of every suspicious incident. But as days passed, the harassment grew bolder. One night, Ethan's security system detected movement around his garage. When he checked the footage, his stomach dropped. A figure cloaked in dark clothing crouched near his car. The intruder planted something before disappearing into the shadows. Ethan rushed outside but found nothing at first glance. Then he spotted a small device hidden beneath the rear bumper of his Rolls-Royce, a GPS tracker. His heart pounded. Who wanted to track his every move? and why. The next morning, Ethan presented the evidence to the HOA board, hoping for their support. But the meeting was a cold affair. Karen was there, poised and self-righteous, casting subtle glances at Ethan that made the room tense. "The community's safety is paramount," the board president said cautiously. "But we must ensure due process. If Mr. Ethan has proof of harassment, he should report it to the police." Karen seized the moment. "This entire ordeal is a distraction. Perhaps Ethan should consider whether he truly fits here. We all want a peaceful neighborhood, but that peace depends on trust and respect." Ethan clenched his fists beneath the table. The board's reluctance felt like a betrayal. Outside, whispers spread faster than wildfire. Some neighbors sympathized, but many feared Karen's influence too much to speak openly. Ethan's isolation deepened. One afternoon, as Ethan walked his dog near the community park, he overheard hushed voices. Two residents spoke in hurried tones about keeping the neighborhood safe and not letting outsiders ruin everything. Their words carried a hidden menace, a silent threat that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Yet amid the shadows, Ethan found a spark of hope. Mrs. Jenkins, once timid, now approached him with determination. "Karen isn't the only one with secrets," she whispered. "There are others who want to see you gone, but you're not alone." Ethan realized this battle wasn't just with Karen. It was with a network of control and fear that gripped Cedar Grove. That night, alone in his sleek, modern home, Ethan stared out at the darkened street. The game had changed. It was no longer about proving his innocence. It was about survival. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a video message, grainy footage of his own home recorded at night. The final frame froze on a shadowy figure, standing just beyond the window. The caption, "We're watching." Ethan swallowed hard. Cedar Grove Estates was no longer a sanctuary, it was a battlefield, and the enemy was closing in. The tension in Cedar Grove Estates had reached a breaking point. The HOA's next meeting was scheduled with an urgency that felt more like a showdown than a routine gathering. Ethan arrived early, his sharp suit and calm demeanor a stark contrast to the simmering unease swirling through the room. Karen Whitman was already there, seated confidently at the head of the table, her eyes narrowing as he entered. She radiated control, as if the entire community belonged to her. The board members shuffled papers nervously, some avoiding eye contact with Ethan altogether. But the community was hungry for answers, and this meeting promised to be the climax of weeks of accusations, rumors, and threats. Ethan stood to address the room first. He presented a meticulously organized portfolio, financial statements, legal documents, contracts from his tech startup, and letters of recommendation from business, partners, and former colleagues. His voice was steady, his tone sincere. "I understand the concerns this community has," he said, "but I am not a scammer. I've worked hard to build my life, and I'm here to be a part of Cedar Grove, not to disrupt it." Murmurs of approval rippled through some of the residents, but Karen was ready with her rebuttal. "Legitimacy on paper isn't the whole story," Karen shot back, her voice sharp. "There are still questions about his sudden wealth and about his willingness to flaunt it in a community that values humility and trust. This isn't just about money, it's about character." The atmosphere grew charged. Karen's insinuations began to wear on the board members, some of whom clearly wanted the matter settled quickly. Then, unexpectedly, the door opened. A tall man in his late 40s stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I'm Robert Hastings," he announced, his voice firm. "I used to be on the HOA board here before I stepped down last year. I've watched what's been happening with interest." All eyes turned to him, and Karen's confident smile faltered just slightly. Robert continued, pulling out his own stack of documents. "I have evidence of Karen's previous actions in other communities, harassment complaints, lawsuits, even reports of intimidation and rule manipulation. She's been involved in conflicts far beyond Cedar Grove. Gasps echoed through the room. Robert laid out a pattern of behavior. How Karen had used her influence to control HOA boards, silence dissent, and bully newcomers who didn't fit her ideal mold. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone was challenging Karen's reign with facts. Karen's eyes burned with fury, but she maintained her composure. "These are baseless accusations," she snapped. "And this man's sudden reappearance is clearly an attempt to sabotage my reputation." Robert shook his head. "I'm here because this community deserves the truth. It's time to end the cycle of fear and control." The room buzzed with energy as the board debated fiercely. Some members expressed regret for not speaking up sooner. Others worried about the fallout of confronting Karen. Ethan watched as the tide seemed to turn, but the battle was far from over. As the meeting adjourned, Karen approached Ethan quietly. "This isn't finished," she hissed. "You've made powerful enemies. Be careful." Ethan met her gaze evenly. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, whispers of Robert's revelations spread quickly. The neighborhood was awakening to a deeper struggle, one that went beyond a flashy car or a young newcomer. It was about control, power, and who truly belonged. But even with this new ally, Ethan knew Karen's network ran deep. The real fight was only beginning. The brief victory at the board meeting left Ethan hopeful but wary. Karen's thinly veiled threats lingered like a shadow, a reminder that she wasn't about to surrender her grip on Cedar Grove without a fight. And as Ethan soon discovered, Karen wasn't his only concern. In the days following Robert Hastings's dramatic return, Ethan noticed subtle changes around the neighborhood. Friendly faces became colder. Invitations stopped, and the whispers, those hushed conversations behind closed doors, turned darker. One afternoon, Ethan received an email with no subject line. The message was short, but its meaning was clear. "Stop digging, or we'll make sure you regret it more than Karen's threats." Ethan's pulse quickened. Who else was involved? How deep did this web of intimidation go? Determined to find out, Ethan met with Robert again. They pored over documents, emails, and HOA records in Ethan's home office. Robert revealed a hidden side of Cedar Grove's history, one riddled with secret alliances, cover-ups, and carefully masked vendettas. "It's not just Karen," Robert said gravely. "There's a group within the HOA that benefits from keeping things as they are. They don't want new blood. They don't want transparency. They want control." As they talked, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text message popped up. "We're watching you now, always." Below the text was a photo, Ethan's home taken from a vantage point only a few houses away. Ethan's blood ran cold. The unseen enemy was closer than he thought. That night, Ethan barely slept. Every creak and shadow outside felt like a threat. He double-checked his security system, installed motion sensors, and even hired a private investigator to keep watch. Yet no amount of preparation could shield him from the next blow. 2 days later, his startup's main investor called with urgent news. A smear campaign had begun online, spreading false accusations about Ethan's company, claims of fraud, data theft, and unethical practices. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Ethan sat stunned, the weight of the attack settling over him like a storm cloud. The war had escalated beyond his neighborhood. It was personal, professional, and relentless. He knew then that Cedar Grove was just the beginning. Whoever was orchestrating this had power and reach far beyond the HOA's confines. But Ethan refused to be broken. With Robert's support and his own resilience, he prepared to fight back. The upcoming HOA vote on Karen's position would be critical. If they could rally enough support to remove her, maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood and Ethan's life could find some peace. But first, Ethan had to confront the darkness lurking, not just outside his door, but within the very walls of Cedar Grove Estates. As he stared out his window late into the night, the city lights shimmering in the distance, Ethan whispered to himself, "I'm not running. Not now. Not ever." The days leading up to the crucial HOA vote crackled with tension, every interaction tinged with suspicion and hidden agendas. Ethan moved carefully through the neighborhood, knowing each smile could mask an ally or a spy. Robert had been a steady ally, but even he admitted the challenge was bigger than either of them anticipated. "Karen isn't just a bully," he warned one evening. "She's part of a larger machine, one that's been running Cedar Grove for years. Pull one thread, and the whole tapestry unravels." Ethan's mind raced with the implications. The thought of a conspiracy rooted deep within the HOA sent chills down his spine. Who else was involved? How far did their influence reach? Late one night, Ethan received an anonymous envelope slid under his front door. Inside were photos, clear, close-up shots of Karen meeting secretly with several HOA board members, including some he had thought were neutral. There were notes scribbled on the back, hinting at deals made in the shadows. The message was clear. Karen wasn't acting alone. Armed with this new evidence, Ethan reached out to the board president, a usually reserved woman named Linda. She agreed to meet privately. In the quiet of a local cafe, Linda confessed, "Karen's influence is suffocating. Many of us are afraid to speak up, but you've given us a chance to change that." The vote was scheduled for the following weekend, and tensions ran high. Campaigning for support, Ethan and Robert worked tirelessly to rally neighbors, sharing the evidence and exposing the hidden alliances. Yet, despite their efforts, the night before the vote brought a shocking revelation. Ethan found an email from an unknown source containing a video. It showed Karen confronting a masked figure in a dimly lit room, discussing plans to keep the community in line and deal with troublemakers. But the figure wasn't who Ethan expected. It was someone he trusted, a member of the HOA board he had considered an ally. Betrayal cut deep. The discovery sent Ethan reeling, but it also steeled his resolve. The fight was no longer just against Karen. It was against an entire corrupt system willing to sacrifice anyone for control. On the day of the vote, the community gathered in the clubhouse, a palpable energy buzzing in the air. Ethan stood before the crowd, heart pounding, as residents cast their ballots. When the final count was announced, the room fell silent. Karen was removed from her position. Cheers erupted, but Ethan noticed subtle glances, some full of relief, others laced with fear. The victory was bittersweet. The true battle had just begun. As Ethan packed up his things that night, his phone buzzed with one last message. "You've won this round, but beware. The shadows are long, and they never forget." Ethan looked out over Cedar Grove Estates, the streetlights flickering in the distance. The war for the neighborhood was far from over. The evening after the HOA vote, Cedar Grove Estates felt different. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by cautious optimism. Karen Whitman's reign had ended, at least on paper. Ethan sat on his porch, the sleek silhouette of his Rolls Royce gleaming under the streetlights. His phone lay silent beside. The threats momentarily paused. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a breath. But peace was fleeting. A sudden knock echoed from the front gate. Ethan tensed and stood, eyes scanning the darkened street. No one was there. Just as he was about to return inside, a familiar voice called from the shadows. "Ethan!" He spun around. Robert emerged from the night, face grim. "We need to talk," Robert said urgently. "There's something you need to see." Robert handed Ethan a flash drive. "This is everything. The financial records, emails, and proof linking Karen's network to a major real estate scam. Not just here, but across multiple communities." Ethan's breath caught. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone imagined. Suddenly, headlights flooded the street. Two unmarked cars screeched to a halt. Men in suits jumped out, flashing badges. "Mr. Adams," one said, "we're with the State Attorney General's office. We've been investigating Karen Whitman and her associates for months." Ethan's heart raced. Justice was finally arriving. Over the next weeks, raids were conducted, arrests made. Karen and several HOA board members faced charges ranging from fraud to intimidation. The news spread like wildfire, shaking the very foundation of Cedar Grove Estates. Through it all, Ethan's life changed. His startup grew stronger, backed by new investors inspired by his resilience. The neighborhood began to heal, neighbors reconnecting in a spirit of unity and transparency. One afternoon, as Ethan parked his Rolls Royce in the driveway, a young woman approached. "Mr. Adams? I just wanted to say thank you," she said, smiling. "I was one of Karen's victims in another community. You gave me hope." Ethan smiled back, humbled. "We're stronger when we stand together." But just as the sun set over Cedar Grove Estates, Ethan's phone buzzed with one last message. "This isn't the end. Watch your back." Ethan stared at the screen, a knowing smile curling his lips. "No matter what," he whispered, "I'm ready." The story of the young man with the Rolls Royce wasn't just about wealth or suspicion. It was about courage, community, and fighting for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. And Ethan Adams was just getting started.